Along the slow, winding rivers of Indiana, where the water moves quietly and the banks disappear into darkness. There are places where boats once carried people across. Simple docks. Wooden ramps. Small waiting areas carved into the riverbank. But when night falls, the rivers remember. Water laps against empty landings with no current. Ropes creak though no boat is tied. Footsteps echo across planks that should have rotted away long ago. Locals whisper that not everyone who boarded the ferries made it across. Some fell into the water. Some were pulled under by the current. Some vanished without a sound. And when the fog rolls in, the old ferry landings are no longer empty. Tonight, we follow the rivers through the heart of Indiana. To the most haunted river ferry landings. Places where people once waited to cross. And where some are still waiting. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. I hope you are somewhere safe and dry, because the places we are about to visit are cold, damp, and filled with restless echoes. Long before bridges spanned the rivers of Indiana, ferries were lifelines. They carried families, travelers, traders, and workers across wide, unpredictable waters. Ferry operators lived beside the river. They worked long hours. They watched the water day and night. And they witnessed terrible things. Storms that overturned boats. Ice that crushed ferries against the banks. People slipping into dark water and never resurfacing. When bridges replaced ferries, many landings were abandoned. The docks collapsed. The ferries rotted away. But the stories never left. Visitors today report hearing bells ring from the water. Seeing lantern lights drifting across empty rivers. And hearing voices calling from the opposite shore, asking to be taken across. Before we step closer to the riverbank, let me ask you something. If you were standing alone at an abandoned ferry landing at night, and heard someone softly asking for a ride across the river, but there was no boat in sight, would you answer them or slowly back away? Now breathe slowly. Listen to the water. And let us begin our journey through the haunted river ferry landings of Indiana. Along the winding course of the river, there is a place where the water changes. Upstream, the river is a familiar shade of tea-stained brown, reflecting the sky and the overhanging trees. But at a precise bend, marked by a single, gnarled willow, the water turns unnaturally dark. It is not the dark of depth, for the river is shallow there. It is a pure, light-absorbing blackness, like a seam of ink bleeding through the current. This black water is perfectly still by day, a silent, mirrored obsidian. But as twilight deepens into night, the landing awakens with phenomena that defy explanation. The first sign is the ripples. They begin as small, concentric circles. Far from the bank, where no stone could have fallen. And no fish could have jumped. They multiply, intersecting in complex, chaotic patterns. As if the surface is being pelted by an unseen rain. All this occurs on windless nights. When the air is dead calm. And the trees are silent sentinels. Then come the sounds. Visitors who have braved the dusk report a distinct, rhythmic splashing. It is not the playful slap of water against wood, but the deliberate, struggling sound of something trying to stay afloat. And beneath that, something worse. Muffled cries, distant and distorted by the water, yet unmistakably human in their desperation. They seem to rise from directly beneath the black surface, a chorus of panic that lasts for a few chilling moments before fading back into the silent rush of the river. The history of the landing is a patchwork of tragic tales. Centuries ago, this bend was a ford, a shallow crossing point on a vital trade route. Historical records are sparse, but local archives hint at a catastrophic event. A merchant caravan, a group of several families traveling with their worldly goods, attempted a crossing during a sudden, violent storm. The river, normally placid, swelled with frightening speed. Witnesses from the high bank reported seeing the wagons, heavy with goods, being swept off the submerged ford. The people, weighed down by their clothing and possessions, struggled against the black, churning water. Not a single soul made it to the far shore. Since that day, the river at that bend never cleared. The blackness settled in, a permanent stain. Some say it is the riverbed itself, churned up and forever changed by the tragedy. Others believe it is the collective shadow of what was lost, a spectral residue saturating the water. Modern investigations have only deepened the mystery. Water samples taken from the black current reveal nothing unusual, no mineral imbalance, no pollutant. When analyzed in a glass jar, the water appears completely normal. Yet, when returned to the river at that bend, the darkness reclaims it. Sonar scans of the riverbed show strange, shifting shadows that do not correspond to any physical debris. Audio recordings made at night capture the splashes and the faint, blurred frequencies of the cries, but experts cannot isolate them as definitively human or natural. They exist in a frustrating acoustic gray area. Fishermen avoid the stretch of water entirely, noting that no life seems to thrive there. No insects skim the surface, no birds dive for food. The air is often several degrees colder at the landing, a pocket of chill even on a summer evening. People who have gotten too close to the water's edge after dark speak of an overwhelming sense of dread, a primal urge to step back, coupled with the feeling of being watched by the water itself. Today, Black Currant Landing is a place of quiet avoidance. The old path to it is overgrown, and there are no signs to point the way. Yet, it draws a certain kind of visitor, those intrigued by the intersection of history and mystery. They come with cameras and recorders, sitting on the bank as night falls. They watch the ripples form on the ink-black surface, and they listen. And on some nights, they hear it. The frantic splashing, the choked, bubbling cries just beneath the silence, a haunting reenactment of a moment of terror forever imprinted on the water. It is a sound that suggests not malice, but endless, desperate struggle, a memory the river cannot forget and will not release, playing out in the dark current for any ear brave enough to hear it. At the quiet end of the coastal town of Miliora, where the cobbled streets give way to weather-beaten planks, lies a place known as Widow's Crossing. It is not a grand harbor, but a simple wooden dock that stretches like a frail finger into the gray expanse of the North Sea. The air here is perpetually salted, carrying the cry of gulls and the low, endless sigh of the waves. And as dusk settles, a silent vigil begins. For generations, this has been a place of waiting. The name does not stem from a single story, but from a collective truth of a community built on the sea. Wives, mothers, and sisters would gather here as daylight faded, their eyes scanning the horizon for the familiar shapes of fishing trawlers returning home. It was a ritual of hope, a silent prayer made of woolen shawls and anxious hands. But one story, from the late 19th century, etched itself so deeply into the soul of the place that it seems to have altered the very atmosphere. Her name was Elara Vane. Local records show she was the wife of a fisherman named Silas, captain of the vessel known as the Evening Star. By all accounts, theirs was a union of deep and quiet affection. Every evening, without fail, Elara would walk from their cottage to the end of the dock. She would stand there, a solitary figure against the vastness, until she could pick out the lantern of her husband's boat amid the returning fleet. Then, one autumn, the Evening Star did not return. A sudden storm, fierce and unexpected, had risen far out in the fishing grounds. Several boats were lost. Silas Vane and his crew were never found. No wreckage, no final proof. Just an empty space on the horizon. Yet, Elara kept her vigil. Every evening, as the sun bled into the sea, she returned to the dock. Neighbors spoke of her unwavering posture, a statue of hope slowly hardening into a monument of grief. She waited for a decade, through rain and gale and bitter frost. Until she herself passed away, some say from a broken heart, though the record simply states from a prolonged illness. It is after this point that the stories shift from history to something else. For soon after Ilara's death, townsfolk reported a new presence at the crossing. As twilight deepens, a shadowy figure materializes at the end of the dock. It is not a detailed form, but a silhouette, the shape of a woman in a long skirt and shawl, standing with a posture of profound expectation. It does not move, does not pace. It simply stands, facing the open water, a stark cutout against the fading light. The figure is most often reported on clear, still evenings, the kind that preceded the fatal storm. Those who have seen it from a distance describe a feeling of overwhelming sadness. A cold that seems to emanate not from the air, but from a deep, timeless sorrow. The figure is not a threatening presence, but a profoundly heavy one. The figure is always gone by first light, fading with the stars, as if its watch is only for the hours of darkness. Parapsychologists who have studied similar phenomena suggest that intense, ritualized emotion can create a kind of psychic imprint. Ilara Vane's nightly vigil was an act of such focused longing, such powerful and repeated emotional energy, that it may have stained the location itself. The dock and the air around it became a recording device, playing back the strongest moment of her life. Which was, tragically, a moment of waiting. But there is another, more haunting interpretation. Some locals believe it is not Ilara at all. They whisper that the figure is not the one who waited, but a manifestation of the collective anxiety of all who have waited at that dock. It is the essence of the widow's watch, given form. It stares across the water because that is what the place was built for, not to welcome, but to yearn. To visit Widow's Crossing at dusk is to feel the weight of absence. The modern town is bright and safe behind you. But here, at the old dock, the past is still present. It is a lesson in the geography of grief. Some spaces become so defined by a single human action that the action itself becomes eternal. The love does not fade. The hope does not die. It simply stands, night after night, waiting for a return that history has already denied. The figure at the edge of the dock does not ask for pity. It does not seek attention. It is a monument, not of stone, but of memory and habit. A reminder that the deepest human emotions are not always quiet ghosts. Sometimes, they are patient ones. They stand watch, long after the reason for the watch is gone. Forever staring at a horizon that holds nothing but the echo of a promise. And the endless, sighing sea. On a forgotten bend of the wide Bellwater River, a single, weathered post rises from the muddy bank. To it is bolted an old ferry bell, its iron casing blistered with rust. Its clapper still and silent through the long daylight hours. This is Bellwater Landing. The town moved its official port upstream a century ago. But the bell remains, a lonely sentinel with a peculiar and persistent habit. For the bell rings. Not by any human hand, and never during the day. Only after midnight, when the mist gathers on the Rivera's surface, does the sound emerge. And it never comes from the post on the shore. The sound, residents insist, always comes from the river itself. It is a soft, deep, tolling note that seems to originate from the center of the channel. A phantom peal that carries through the damp air to the homes that line the bank. Historical records show that Bellwater Landing was a busy crossing point for nearly 80 years. The ferry, named the River Maiden, was a broad, flat vessel that could carry wagons, livestock, and passengers. Its captain, Elias Finch, was a man of rigid routine. He rang the bell once to signal departure. And twice to signal arrival. He did this without fail for tens of thousands of crossings. The schedule was his religion, the bell its sacred instrument. The end of the ferry was not dramatic tragedy, but simple progress. When the iron bridge was completed 5 miles downriver, the service became obsolete. The River Maiden was sold for scrap. Captain Finch, they say, simply never accepted the change. He lived in a cottage near the landing until his death, and locals would often see him in the evenings, staring at the water where his Liffey-esque work had once unfolded. The phenomenon began not long after he passed. A fisherman, camping on the bank, reported hearing the clear, resonant tone of a bell just after 1 in the morning. He assumed it was a buoy or another boat, but when he scanned the river, it was completely empty. The sound, he noted, was oddly muffled, as if heard through a thick wool blanket. The bell on the post was still. The ringing was emanating from a spot some 50 feet out in the dark water. Since that night, the experience has been repeated by dozens of sober, reliable witnesses. A shift worker walking home along the river path. An insomniac sitting on their porch. They all described the same sequence. A deep, single gong that vibrates in the chest. A pause of precisely 30 seconds. Then a second, identical tone. The sound possesses a liquid quality, as if the river itself is vibrating like a massive drumhead. It feels less like a sound traveling across the water, and more like the water is generating the sound from within. Scientists and skeptics have visited, of course. They have suggested underground currents striking submerged metal, or peculiar temperature inversions carrying distant sounds. But no instrument ever placed on the shore bell has recorded even the faintest vibration when the midnight tolling occurs. The sound is utterly detached from its physical source. Furthermore, hydrophones lowered into the river record nothing unusual. The sound, it seems, is only audible to the human ear, a perception, not a measurable physical event. The most compelling theory is one of profound routine, a psychic imprint on a location. A psychic imprint on a location. It is not a ghostly captain ringing a ghostly bell. It is the echo of the action itself, replaying like a broken record in the fabric of the place. The landing is still waiting for the ferry to come in, and the signal for its arrival persists, broadcast from the heart of the river. Today, the rusted bell on its post is a curiosity by day. Tourists sometimes tap it, producing a dull, dry clank that bears no resemblance to the legendary tone. The true residents of the riverside homes have grown accustomed to the nightly ritual. Some find it comforting, a reminder of the town's history. Others keep their windows shut, uneasy with the precision of the unseen. For those who stand on the bank in the deep quiet of a bellwater night, the experience is hauntingly specific. The world holds its breath. And then, from the cold, dark center of the river, the clear, wet sound of a bell rings once. It is the sound of an arrival that never happens, a signal for a vessel that will never again dock, a timeless echo of routine from a river that remembers. Along the remote northern coast, where the pine trees grow thick to the water's edge, there is a place where the river widens to meet the sea. This is Driftwood Ferry Point. It is a silent cove now, home only to a sagging wooden dock and the rusted skeleton of a ticket booth. No ferry has run here for over 70 years. The story of its end is a sad and simple one. The last ferry, the River Maiden, made its final crossing on a bitter November night in 1952. A sudden squall swept down from the mountains, turning the placid estuary into a churning chaos of whitecaps and driving rain. The River Maiden, overloaded with passengers rushing home for the winter holidays, was last seen as a blur of light in the storm before the lights vanished. Search parties combed the shoreline for days. They found life preservers, a suitcase, and a captain's hat. The service was shut down, deemed too perilous for this unpredictable stretch of water. The dock was left to the elements, and the point was largely forgotten by the world beyond the few fishing villages that dot the coast. Yet, the point was not empty. Almost immediately after the tragedy, the locals noticed a new phenomenon. The usual flotsam of the Rivera branches, dead reeds, but Liza was joined by something else. Pieces of wood, clearly from a vessel, began to appear. They were not random splinters, but distinct, worn boards, about the length of a man's arm, with edges softened by time and water. These boards gather in a still eddy just north of the old dock. They float in a loose, slow circle. And when the wind is right, or when the tide shifts, they are pushed gently toward the pilings. One by one, they knock against the mossy wood of the dock. It is not a random sound. It is a rhythm. Tap. Pause. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap. This rhythmic knocking is what first gave rise to the stories. An old fisherman, mending his nets nearby in the twilight, was the first to say it aloud. He heard not just noise, but a pattern. It sounded, he said, like a name. Not just any name, but the name of his brother, who had been on the River Maiden that night. Word spread quietly through the villages. People began to visit the point, not to fish, but to listen. They would sit on the shore at dusk, when the knocking was said to be clearest. And many came away pale and shaken, insisting they had heard the rhythmic tap spell out the name of a lost loved one. A mother heard her daughter's name. A friend heard the nickname of his lost companion. Skeptics, of course, dismiss it as the power of suggestion, the mind finding order in chaos, especially in a place heavy with grief. They say the boards are simply debris from the wreck, trapped by the peculiar currents of the cove, knocking randomly as all driftwood does. But the stories persist, and so do the peculiarities. The boards are never the same. One day there may be 6 floating in the eddy. The next, there might be 12. Yet they never seem to rot or break down further. They are always smooth, waterlogged, and ancient. If someone removes a piece, perhaps as a morbid souvenir, it is said another will take its place by the next high tide, as if the point maintains its own inventory. Modern investigators have tried to analyze the sound. One team left a hydrophone in the water for a month. Their audio analysis showed a repetitive, non-random pattern. But it was inconsistent, changing with the weather and the time of day. They could not correlate it to any known code, like Morse. They concluded it was likely a complex acoustic effect caused by the shape of the cove, the density of the wood, and the movement of the water. A perfectly natural explanation for a perfectly unnatural sound. There is a local tradition, quietly upheld by the older families. On the anniversary of the sinking, they do not lay wreaths or hold a service at a church. Instead, they go to the point at sunset. They stand silently on the shore. And they listen. They do not speak the names aloud. They simply wait, and listen to the water speak them instead. The rhythmic knocking is a language of loss, written in taps and pauses on the hollow stage of the old dock. So if you ever find yourself on that lonely stretch of coast, you might follow the overgrown path to Driftwood Ferry Point. You will see the broken boards, turning slowly in the dark water. You will hear them knock, a soft, persistent percussion against the past. And you will have to decide for yourself if it is just the water and the wood. Or if the point is still taking roll call, patiently, endlessly, waiting for a reply that will never come. The story of Silent or Landing begins with an absence, a profound and unsettling quiet. Along the shores of Grey Lake, it is a place that seems to have been removed from the world of sound. By day, it is unremarkable, a small, pebbled beach shaded by pine trees. But as night falls, the silence descends, a thick, palpable blanket that smothers all natural noise. The first thing a visitor notices is the lack of insects. No crickets chirp in the undergrowth, no mosquitoes whine near the ear. The forest, which should be a chorus of nocturnal life, is utterly mute. Then, one becomes aware of the water. Grey Lake is known for its gentle waves lapping against the shore, a rhythmic, soothing sound. But at Silent or Landing, the water makes no sound at all. It moves, you can see the small waves forming and dissolving on the pebbles, but the motion is completely silent, as if you are watching it through a thick pane of glass. This visual paradox is deeply disorienting. But the true phenomenon is a physical one. Those who stay for more than a few minutes report a growing pressure in their ears. It is not a pain, but a deep, pressing fullness, identical to the sensation of being submerged several feet underwater. Ears pop in a futile attempt to equalize, and the silence seems to press in from all sides, becoming a weight of its own. Voices sound muffled and distant, even when spoken aloud right next to you. The feeling is one of being slowly, inexorably, dragged down into a soundless deep. The history of this place is linked to a forgotten trade. A century ago, Grey Lake was a major route for timber. Long, heavy rafts of logs were floated down its length, guided by teams of rivermen. These men were experts, navigating the silent, deep waters with long poles and oars, communicating through a series of low whistles and hand signals. Their work was dangerous and required an almost supernatural understanding of the water's hidden currents. The landing gained its name from a single, tragic event during the Great Log Drive of 1912. A massive jam occurred just off this point, a tangled island of pine logs blocking the entire channel. The crew, led by a foreman known for his silent efficiency, worked for 2 days to break it. On the final night, using dynamite in a calculated risk, they attempted to clear the key log. The charge was mistimed. The explosion did not fire upwards, but downwards, shearing through the jam and creating a sudden, violent whirlpool in the deep water. The foreman and 3 of his crew, standing on the unstable mass of timber, were pulled under in an instant. Since that season, the landing was different. The loggers who returned spoke of the eerie quiet. Of a pressure in the head that made it hard to think. They claimed it was the lake holding its breath, keeping the sounds of that disaster locked in the depths below. The timber company eventually abandoned the route. And nature reclaimed the shore, but the silence remained, a permanent memorial. Scientific curiosity has done little to explain it. Acoustic surveys show a bizarre dead zone at the landing, where sound waves are absorbed at an unprecedented rate. The air pressure is normal, yet the physiological feeling of pressure is universally reported. Divers who have explored the lakebed directly offshore describe a strange landscape of perfectly preserved, waterlogged logs still tangled in a monolithic heap. And a layer of exceptionally soft, sound-absorbing silt that blankets everything like a funeral shroud. For the occasional visitor who seeks it out today, Silent or Landing offers an experience of profound isolation. It is not a place of ghostly whispers, but of their absolute opposite. The pressure in the ears builds, a constant reminder of the depth and the weight of the water just feet away. You find yourself moving slowly, carefully, as if trying not to disturb something that is sleeping far below. The silent waves crawl up the silent stones. And the mute trees stand witness. It feels less like a haunting, and more like an ongoing entombment. A piece of the lake that is forever holding that moment of sudden descent, pulling the world into its soundless vacuum, allowing no echo of life to disturb the memory of the deep, quiet dark where the oars finally stilled. There is a forgotten stretch of the Blackwater River, a deep and slow-moving bend shrouded by ancient cypress trees. Their gnarled roots twist into the dark water like skeletal fingers. This place is known locally as Lantern Bend. It is not marked on any modern map. And by day, it is simply a quiet, murky backwater. But on certain nights, when the mist rises from the river, And the moon is hidden behind a veil of cloud. The bend comes alive with a soft, impossible light. The phenomenon begins subtly. At first, you might mistake it for a trick of the eyes, a reflection of a stray star on the still water. Then another appears. And another. Faint, luminous spheres, no larger than a held apple, materialize just above the surface of the river. They hover perhaps an inch above the black water, casting a gentle, greenish-gold light that seems to push back the thick darkness of the trees. Their glow is steady and cool, like the light from old phosphorus or decaying wood. These are not random sparks. They move with a slow, deliberate purpose. From the center of the bend, they begin a silent procession toward the shore. They drift at walking pace, following the curve of the bank, as if carried by a current that does not touch the water. They move in small groups or sometimes a loose chain, their light casting long, trembling reflections on the river's surface below them. The sight is eerily beautiful, a silent parade of lost stars making for the land. The defining characteristic of the lantern bend lights is their profound shyness. They are phenomena of distance and atmosphere. The moment any observer attempts to approach, whether by boat or along the muddy bank, the reaction is immediate and total. The nearest light will simply wink out of existence. Not a fading, not a retreat, but a sudden, absolute cessation, as if it were never there at all. Any movement toward them triggers this vanishing, one by one, until the bend is once again plunged into impenetrable darkness. The bend is once again plunged into impenetrable darkness. All that remains is the faint, damp smell of the river and a profound silence that feels heavier than before. The history of this area provides a poignant clue. A century ago, this bend was not forgotten. It was a vital, if dangerous, part of the local timber industry. Men known as river drivers would guide vast log rafts down the Blackwater. The work was perilous, especially at night or in fog. Before the era of reliable electric lamps, these men used simple, durable lanterns with metal frames and glass panels, often burning oil or fat. They would tie them to poles to mark channels or secure them to the rafts themselves. An accident in this bend, a log jam breaking apart in the dark, could send men and their lights suddenly into the icy water. There is a record of one such tragedy in the autumn of 1912. A large raft, piloted by a crew of 6 men, was caught in a sudden squall. The raft shattered against the submerged snags that still litter the bend. Lanterns were seen tumbling into the torrent. While 3 men made it to shore, 3 others, including the raft's young pilot, were never recovered. The search parties noted how the fog clung to the bend for days afterward. And some spoke of seeing strange, faint lights in the mist, which they dismissed as will-o'-the-wisps or the lanterns of other searchers. This historical incident forms the backbone of the most compelling theory. Paranormal researchers suggest the lights are a form of residual haunting, not of people, but of objects charged with intense purpose. The lanterns were tools of safety, guides through darkness. In their sudden, violent descent into the water, that purposia to light the way, to find the Sharia may have imprinted on the location. The lights now replay that final, desperate journey, attempting to complete their intended path from the deep water to the safety of the bank. Skeptics point to bioluminescence or swamp gas. But these explanations falter. The lights move against the wind and current with clear intention. Their instant disappearance upon approach defies known chemical reactions. They appear most frequently on anniversary dates of autumnal storms, suggesting a tie not to biology, but to memory. To witness the lights of Lantern Bend is to observe a silent, sorrowful ritual. You are not watching ghosts, but the echoes of tools, repeating the last moments of their utility. They are trying to come home. The act of approaching them is an intrusion, a reminder of the living world that interrupts their endless, doomed journey. It forces them to vanish, to reset, until the next suitable night when the conditions are once again perfect for remembrance. The lesson of Lantern Bend is one of incomplete tasks and lost guidance. These faint lights are not seeking attention. They are simply, patiently, trying to finish their job, to illuminate a path to shore that their bearers could never find. They offer a hauntingly beautiful glimpse into a moment frozen in time, a slow-motion echo of a disaster, playing out in soft light and silence on the dark water, forever almost reaching the bank, forever just out of reach. On the western shore of Lake Immer, where the pines grow thick and the water is deep and cold, there is a single wooden dock known as Cold Rope Landing. It is a relic from the era of steam ferries, a gray and weathered structure that groans softly with the lap of the waves. And on its worn planks, left exactly as they were on the final day of service, lie 3 heavy ferry ropes. They are massive coils of hemp, stiff with age and soaked through with decades of lake water, sun, and frost. They look like sleeping serpents, waiting for a reason to stir. By day, the landing is a quiet historical footnote. Visitors might walk to the end of the dock, examine the ropes, and take photographs of the lonely, beautiful vista. The sun dips below the pine ridges. And the deep blue twilight settles over Lake Immer. A subtle change occurs. Those who have stayed too long, or those who have come deliberately to watch, report a slight, almost imperceptible movement. It is not a dramatic slithering. It is a quiet shifting, a gentle tightening of a coil. A slow unspooling of an inch or two of rope across the splintered wood. It happens at the edge of vision. You look directly at the ropes, and they are still. You glance away at the darkening water. And from the corner of your eye, you see the slow, deliberate motion. As if something is adjusting its grip. The movement suggests purpose. A latent energy seeping back into the fibers. As the temperature drops. Local archives reveal that Cold Rope Landing served the last commercial ice-breaking ferry on the lake, the steadfast vessel called the Winter Queen. This ferry operated year-round, a vital lifeline through brutal winters. Its crew was renowned for their skill and courage, handling these very ropes to secure the massive boat against the iron-hard dock, often in blinding snow and howling wind. A poorly coiled or secured line could mean disaster. The ferry service ended abruptly over 50 years ago, but the stories of its final season persist. There was an incident, not a major catastrophe, but a chilling near-miss. During a particularly violent winter gale, with the ferry battling to dock, a young deckhand lost his footing. The story says his ankle became entangled in a loose loop of rope as a wave swept the deck. For a terrifying moment, he was dragged toward the freezing water, saved only by the instantaneous, reflexive pull of the seasoned captain who hauled the rope back with immense force. The deckhand was injured, but alive, his connection to the boat literally the thing that nearly killed him and then saved him. This intense moment of crisis, the surge of adrenaline and desperate force channeled through the hemp fibers, seems to have left an imprint. The ropes, constantly soaked and frozen, then thawed and stressed, may have become a sort of psychic recording medium, absorbing the intense physical and emotional energy of that night and perhaps countless others like it. This brings us to the most unsettling testimony associated with Cold Rope Landing. A number of visitors, standing quietly on the dock after dark, have reported a sudden, brief sensation around their ankles. It is not a trip or a stumble. It is a distinct feeling of cold, wet pressure, as if one of the stiff old coils has silently looped itself and gently, firmly tightened. It lasts only a second or two before releasing. There is never a mark, never a visible movement of the rope. It is purely a tactile ghost. A fleeting memory. Of tension. And connection. Playing itself out. Those who feel it describe a profound chill that has nothing to do with the night air. It is the deep, penetrating cold of lake water from another time. It carries with it a flash of sensation, not of fear, but of urgent necessity, a reflexive need to hold fast, to secure, to prevent a slide into the abyss. Today, the local historical society warns visitors to be off the dock before sunset. They cite deteriorating wood and poor lighting. But everyone familiar with the area knows the unspoken reason. The ropes are resting, but they are not retired. They are waiting, it seems, for a ferry that will never return. In the deep quiet of the lake night, they rehearse their old duties. They shift as if feeling the strain of a phantom ship pulling against them. And sometimes, they seek to make a connection, any connection, briefly tightening around a living ankle as if to secure it to the dock, to the land, to safety. It is a protective instinct woven into frozen hemp, a final, ghostly gesture from a crew long gone, still trying to keep everyone aboard. Deep in the mist-laden lowlands, where the river Glane slows to a wide, silken crawl, there is a place known locally as Mud Bank Crossing. It is not a town, nor even a proper village. It is simply a bend in the river, a stretch of deep, black silt so fine and soft it feels like wet ash. On one side stands a dense, ancient woodland of oak and willow. On the other, a lonely meadow fades into rolling hills. A single, weathered rowboat, tied to a post, offers the only physical passage from bank to bank. But there is another, older crossing here, one that requires no boat. During the dry weeks of late summer, or after a long drought, the river level drops. It reveals a hidden shelf of that deep, viscous mud, a temporary bridge of earth that seems to connect the two worlds. The locals have a simple, unwavering rule about this mud bank. You do not walk on it. Ever. The rule began generations ago, with the first recorded account. A shepherd named Alastair Cade, whose flock grazed in the meadow, was said to have argued with the woodsman from the far side over a strayed lamb. In a fit of stubbornness, with the river low, Alastair decided to forego the boat. He would walk across the exposed mud bank to retrieve his animal and prove a point. They watched him make it nearly halfway, to the deepest part of the channel. Before the evening mist rolled in, obscuring him from view. When the mist cleared minutes later, Alastair was gone. They found no body. They found no sign of a struggle. What they found, illuminated by the lantern light, was a single, clear line of footprints. They began at the meadow's edge and progressed, step by deliberate step, into the very center of the river. And there, they simply stopped. No footprints turned around. No footprints indicated a slip or a fall. They just ended, as if the walker had dissolved into the air or been pulled straight down without a sound. Since that night, the phenomenon has repeated. Not often, perhaps once every few years. It is always the same. After a still, foggy evening, a new set of prints is discovered at dawn. They are always human, barefoot, and of varying sizes. As if men, women, and sometimes even children have taken the walk. They begin at the tree line of the woods, press firmly into the yielding mud, and march in a straight, unwavering line toward the deep water. And they never, ever lead back out. By mid-morning, under the weak sun, the prints begin to soften at the edges. By noon, they are shallow impressions. And by the time the evening mist gathers again, the mud bank is smooth and unblemished, as if it had never been walked upon at all. Scientific explanations are offered, of course. Geologists suggest the peculiar consistency of the silt allows for rapid filling and settling, especially as the sun warms the surface. Psychologists speak of shared hallucination or pareidolia, the mind seeing patterns where none exist. Yet these theories struggle against the physical evidence, the photographs taken by skeptics at first light, which clearly show the deep, detailed impressions before they fade. The most compelling theory is not scientific, but historical. Local archives hint that this bend in the River Glane was a sacred ford for prehistoric tribes. Long before the woodsman or shepherd ever argued. It was believed to be a thin place, a boundary between worlds not just of land, but of states of being. The mud bank, they say, does not lead across the river. It leads through it. The footprints are not of the lost, but of those answering a call from the other side, completing a passage begun long ago. Those who live nearby have adapted. They use the rowboat without question. They warn their children with a seriousness that brooks no argument. The mud bank is not a path. It is an entrance. And on certain nights, when the air is perfectly still and the water is like black glass, they pull their curtains closed. They do not look toward the crossing. They do not want to see who, or what, might be walking out of the woods to make the crossing tonight. So the mud bank remains, a silent and cyclical mystery. A testament to journeys we cannot comprehend. To a pull stronger than instinct. Each set of prints is a story without a narrator. A question without an answer. They are a reminder that some paths, once taken, cannot be untaken. And that some doors in the world, especially those made of earth and water, only open one way. The river continues to flow. The mud waits, smooth and inviting. And every so often, under the cover of mist and memory, it receives a visitor. And keeps the only record it ever makes until the morning comes to wipe it clean, ready for the next. Nestled at the end of a forgotten forest trail on the edge of Cedar Mere, is a simple wooden dock. It is old, weathered to a silvery gray by decades of sun and spray. Most of its planks are soft with rot, creaking gently underfoot in the usual way of tired wood. But one plank is different. It is the seventh plank from the shore, and it is known as the hollow plank. To step on it is to trigger a sound completely alien to its surroundings. Instead of a dull groan, it produces a loud, resonant, and perfectly hollow boom. It echoes under the dock and out across the still water, a deep, wooden percussion note that seems too large, too profound, to come from a single piece of timber. It is the sound of a giant's footfall, or of a great, empty barrel being struck. It is a sound that does not belong. The mystery deepens when the dock is empty. Visitors who have retreated to the tree line, watching from a distance, report that the sound continues. Every few minutes, with a rhythmic consistency, the hollow boom echoes across the mere. It is not random. The interval is precise, roughly the time it takes for a person to walk calmly from the shore to the end of the dock and back again. The plank sounds as if an invisible weight is being placed upon it, step after solitary step, in an endless, lonely patrol. The dock was built by a man named Leo Finch, a quiet boatmaker and violin craftsman who lived alone in a cabin long since reclaimed by the forest. He was a man of rhythm and routine, known for his evening walks to the end of his dock to watch the sunset. He was also a man burdened by a private grief, the loss of his young daughter, Elara, who had loved the mere more than anything. His craftsmanship was his solace, and he poured a strange, meticulous devotion into maintaining his dock, treating each plank as if it were the delicate soundboard of a cello. The local tale, passed down in fragments, suggests a tragedy of attention. On an evening when Leo was deeply engrossed in fitting the belly of a new violin, his daughter went to the dock alone. The details are mercifully vague, lost to time, but the outcome was not. Leo found her in the water. In his grief, a strange fixation took hold. He became convinced the dock itself was at fault, that a single, flawed plank had betrayed her. He methodically tested each one, day after day, listening to their tone, searching for a hollow note, for a weakness that could explain his world collapsing. He never found it, but he never stopped listening, his own footsteps becoming a metronome of sorrow. After Leo himself passed, the new owners of the land discovered the phenomenon. They replaced the seventh plank, not once, but 3 times. Each time, with the new, solid wood securely nailed in place, the hollow boom returned within a day. It was as if the sound was not in the wood, but in the space beneath it, or in the very memory of the place. Scientific inquiries have yielded only more questions. Audio analysis reveals the boom is not merely a sound, but a specific frequency that causes subtle, sympathetic vibrations in the surrounding planks, as if the entire dock is a silent instrument waiting for that one note to be played. Vibration sensors detect no physical movement on the plank when the sound occurs autonomously. There is no subsidence, no expanding wood, no logical trigger. It is as if the dock is remembering a pressure, replaying a moment of weight and consequence. Today, the path to hollow plank landing is seldom used. The mere is still and beautiful, a mirror for the clouds. But those who find their way there often perform the same ritual. They walk the dock, feeling the soft creak of the old boards, until they reach the seventh plank. They hesitate, then step. The hollow boom answers, a sound that seems to rise from the depths of the lake itself. Then they step off, and wait. And in a few minutes, the sound comes again, unprompted. A ghostly echo of a step. A craftsman's ear tuned to a frequency of loss. It is not a threatening sound, but a profoundly lonely one. A measured, rhythmic reminder that some searches are endless. And some echoes are too deeply carved into the world to ever truly fade. It is the sound of a single footfall, walking a path of memory. Forever testing the strength of a world that once gave way. At the confluence of the Grey River and the smaller, slower tributary known as Sighing Creek, there is a place that seems to breathe. It is the site of the old Fogmouth Ferry crossing, a relic from a time when the only way across the water was a wooden raft guided by a rope. The ferry has been gone for 70 years, its pilings rotted down to stumps in the riverbed. But the crossing remembers. And on certain still evenings, usually in the damp chill of autumn, the Fogmouth exhales. The phenomenon does not begin in the sky. It is born from the water itself. The river's surface, usually dark and gently flowing, grows strangely placid. Then, from the very center of the channel where the ferry once ran, a thick, milk-white fog begins to pour forth. It does not settle or drift lazily. It flows with intention, like a slow, rolling breath across the water's surface, expanding and pooling with a quiet urgency. It blankets the river from bank to bank, obscuring everything in a soft, sound-absorbing veil. Locals say it looks like the river is sighing, a great exhalation of cold, damp air from its depths. But the fog is merely the vessel. Within its billowing depths, shapes begin to manifest. They are not distinct figures, but suggestions of movement. The amorphous bulk of what could be a large raft. Tall, upright shadows that might be people standing upon it. Darker patches that move with a slow, pulling motion, as if pushing against an unseen current. These forms are never clear, merely disturbances in the fog's consistency, like figures seen through frosted glass. They travel the old route, from the far bank toward the near, moving with the grim, steady pace of a bygone necessity. It is the sound, however, that truly defines the experience. As the fog shapes make their crossing, whispered conversations drift across the water. Whispered conversations drift across the water. The voices are faint, layered, impossible to isolate into individual speakers. You catch snippets of mundane, weary talk. A mention of the weather, a grumble about the price of grain. A low comment about the chill. The tone is never joyous, but nor is it panicked. It is the sound of people enduring a routine journey, their words swallowed by the fog almost as soon as they are formed. It is the murmur of a crowd that is not there. The echo of 100 forgotten evenings. Historical records indicate the Fogmouth Ferry was decommissioned after a tragedy, though the details are frustratingly vague. Newspaper archives from 1953 mention the sudden disappearance of the ferry operator, an elderly man named Jonah Clay. One evening, he made his final crossing with 6 passengers. Witnesses on the destination shore reported seeing the ferry enter a peculiarly thick bank of fog mid-river. The fog cleared minutes later. The ferry, and all 7 souls aboard, were gone. No wreckage was ever found. The official conclusion was a sudden collapse of the raft, with the current carrying everything away. But the mystery of the complete disappearance, and the peculiar fog, lingered in local memory. Paranormal researchers propose that this event created a temporal echo. The fog that took them became part of the event's psychic signature. Now, under similar atmospheric conditions, the moment replays. The shapes are not ghosts in a traditional sense, but an imprint of the event itself, a recording of mass displacement. The whispers are not the voices of the dead, but the residual sound of their last ordinary moments, forever trapped in that final, fateful crossing. Modern visitors to the site report a profound sense of stillness during the event, a hush that goes beyond the muffling effect of the fog. It feels like watching a moment suspended in time, a silent film with only a whispered soundtrack. The urge to call out, to warn the shadowy figures, is common. But no one ever does. There is an understanding that you are observing a memory, not interacting with beings. The moment you step toward the water's edge, or make a loud noise, the whispers falter. The shapes within the fog seem to dissolve. The fog itself then begins to recede, not lifting, but seeming to drain back into the river as smoothly as it emerged, leaving behind only the cold night and the dark, flowing water. The Fog-Mouth Ferry is a story of a journey without an end. The figures are not searching for rescue. They are simply continuing their commute, forever caught in the act of crossing from one side to the other, their conversations a haunting reminder of the casual talk that often precedes irrevocable change. To stand on that riverbank is to stand at the edge of an echo. It is a reminder that some events are so profound, they etch themselves not just into stone or record, but into the very climate of a place. The river breathes out their memory in a cold, damp mist, carrying with it the soft, sad murmur of people who were, for a brief moment, simply going home. On a lonely stretch of the Garrison River, where the current slows and the muddy bottom deepens, there is a place called Broken Rudder Point. The dock here is small, private, and perpetually in need of repair. It services a handful of old boathouses, their paint peeling in the humid air. And directly beneath its central pilings, resting in 12 feet of murky water, lies the source of its name. It is the shattered, waterlogged remains of a large wooden rudder. This is no ordinary piece of debris. It is a massive thing, carved from solid oak, now split nearly in 2 along its central post. It lies half buried in the silt, a dark shape visible only on the clearest days when the sun strikes the water at just the right angle. Local fishermen know to give it a wide berth, their lines and nets snagging on its splintered edges with uncanny regularity. But the true reason for their caution only becomes apparent after dark. For it is at night that the phenomenon occurs. A slow, rhythmic, and persistent bumping sound begins. It is a deep, muffled thud that resonates through the wooden planks of the dock and carries across the still water. It feels less like an impact from the side, and more like a solid object striking the underside of the structure from below, over and over again, with a patient, relentless force. With a patient, relentless force. The sound is always localized to the area directly above the sunken rudder. It starts late, often after midnight, and can continue for hours. It is the sound of something trying, and failing, to surface. Those who have been brave enough to shine a light into the water during the occurrence see only the dark, disturbed swirl of silt, as if something large has just moved out of the beam. The history of the rudder is a matter of public record, though its full story is seldom told. It belonged to the Agnes Rose, a sturdy cargo barge that plied the Garrison River for 3 decades. The barge was known for its reliability, its pilot a man named Silas, who had an almost symbiotic connection to his vessel. He could feel the river move through the rudder's handle, it was said, navigating fog and current by instinct alone. The incident that ended the Agnes Rose's career was a simple mechanical failure. A submerged log, hidden by spring floodwaters, struck the rudder with tremendous force. Silas, fighting the suddenly useless tiller, managed to guide the stricken barge to this very dock, saving his cargo and his crew. The barge was repaired and sold. But the broken rudder was left where it sank, too heavy and cumbersome to retrieve. Silas, however, never piloted another boat. He lived out his days in a cottage overlooking the point, and locals often saw him staring at the water, his hand unconsciously making small, steering motions at his side. The bumping began the spring after Silas passed away. It was first noticed by a resident living in one of the boathouses, who complained of a noise that sounded like a large fish trapped under the dock. Investigations found nothing. Yet the sound returned, night after night, a slow, stubborn pounding. Divers have examined the rudder. They confirm it is just a piece of wood, tangled in old roots and river sediment. There is no machinery attached, no current strong enough to lift it. Yet hydrophones placed in the water record the distinct impact sounds, synchronized with the vibrations felt on the dock above. The leading theory among those who study such anomalies is one of persistent intention. They suggest that the rudder was so deeply tied to Silas's identity, to his life's work of steering and surfacing, that a final, powerful impulse to regain control imprinted itself upon the object. It is not a ghost, but a ghost of an action. The urgent need to correct the course. To pull up from the depths, to regain the surface and the air, is trapped in the fractured wood. For those who stand on the dock after hours, the experience is deeply unsettling. The rhythmic thud travels up through the soles of your shoes. It has a wet, solid quality to it. You can feel the frustration in each impact, the struggle against immense weight and resistance. It is the sound of something that does not know it is broken, something that is still trying to perform its duty, to rise and to guide. The residents of Broken Rudder Point have grown accustomed to the nocturnal rhythm. Some say it is a comfort, a reminder of Silas's skill and dedication. Others keep their distance, uneasy with the relentless, unfinished effort it represents. The rudder remains where it fell, a silent artifact by day and a restless one by night. And to the will that followed it. It is the sound of a course that needs correcting. And a deep, abiding refusal to remain submerged. The river flows on, but in the dark beneath the dock, a battle that ended decades ago is still being fought, one slow, stubborn bump at a time. Along a forgotten stretch of coastline, where the cliffs crumble into the sea, there is a place the locals avoid. They call it Waiting Man's Landing. The only sounds are the relentless crash of waves below and the mournful cry of gulls overhead. On a jagged promontory, a man stands. His clothing is of another time, a heavy wool coat worn thin by decades, perhaps centuries, of salt wind and rain. His posture is not one of anticipation, but of profound and eternal patience. He does not move. He does not shift his weight. The storms lash him. The sun bakes the fabric of his coat. And winter frost dusts his shoulders with white. Yet he remains, a fixed point in the changing landscape. He is as much a part of the cliff as the ancient stone itself. Over the years, the bravest or most foolish have tried to approach him. A curious hiker, straying from the path, might see the silhouette against the sky and feel compelled to call out. To ask if he is lost, or if he needs help. This is when the peculiar rule of Waiting Man's Landing reveals itself. If you speak to him, directly, he will acknowledge it in the only way he can. He begins to fade. First, the edges of his form soften, blending with the sea mist that forever haunts this coast. Then, the solidity of him dissolves, like smoke dispersing in a gentle breeze. The process is slow, deliberate. It is not a sudden disappearance, but a gradual relinquishing of form. Within moments, the space where he stood is empty, leaving only the damp air and a profound, unsettling silence. He is always gone for a time. Days, sometimes weeks. But those who know the place understand. You will climb the path one foggy morning. And there he will be again, in the exact same spot. His back to the land, his gaze locked on the distant seam where the sea meets the sky. Who is he? Theories are whispered in the village pub, but no records exist. Some say he was a sailor, waiting for a ship that sank centuries ago. Others believe he is a penitent, serving an endless vigil for a terrible mistake. A romantic legend claims he waits for a love lost to the sea, bound by a promise to watch for her return until the end of time. The truth is, we will never know. His story is his own, and he keeps it with him. And he keeps it with him, facing the vastness. The mystery is the essence of the place. It is a monument not to a known history, but to the universal human conditions of waiting. Of longing, of a pause that has become permanent. There is a solemn respect that grows for him, once the initial fear subsides. He harms no one. He asks for nothing. His presence is a quiet testament to something unfinished. He is a reminder that some questions have no answers. And some vigils outlast the lifetimes of those who remember their origin. Scientists have tried to study the phenomenon, of course. They bring instruments to measure electromagnetic fields, to record audio anomalies. The air is just air. The rock is just rock. Their data shows only the natural world, stubbornly refusing to explain the unnatural. The waiting man does not perform for cameras or sensors. He simply is. To stand there, at a safe and silent distance, is to feel the weight of deep time. The ceaseless rhythm of the waves seems to sync with his silent watch. You begin to see the world from his perspective, the immense, rolling gray, the occasional break of sunlight on water, the slow march of weather systems. It is a view of timelessness. And then you realize the most humbling part. In his eternal watching, he has become the watched. We are drawn to him, to his mystery, to the echo of our own unresolved waits reflected in his still form. He is a mirror, and we see in him our own patience, our own griefs, our own silent hopes anchored to a point we cannot leave. So the path, though overgrown, is never fully reclaimed by nature. There are always new footprints in the mud. People come, not to solve him, but to acknowledge him. To share, for a moment, in the quiet enormity of his vigil. They look at his back, and they look out at what he sees, and they leave a little quieter than they came. He remains. The mist gathers and departs. The seasons turn. The waiting man stands at his landing, a sentinel for a secret he guards so fiercely, he has become part of the landscape, forever watching an horizon that holds his answer, or perhaps his rest. But until that day, he waits. And in his waiting, he gives this lonely cliff a name, and a story that will never fully be told. On the northern stretch of the Ashbourne River, the land itself bears a scar. This is Split Bank Crossing. The riverbank does not slope gently into the water here. Instead, the earth looks as if it was violently torn open, a ragged gash several yards long, revealing dark clay and twisted roots beneath a thin skin of grass. It is a wound in the landscape that shows no sign of healing, a permanent rupture between the river and the field. A wound in the landscape that shows no sign of healing, a permanent rupture between the river and the field. The first physical sensation is one of temperature. Even on the hottest summer day, a distinct and localized cold radiates from the water at this exact point. It is not the coolness of shade, but a deeper, damp chill that rises like an invisible exhalation from the Rivera's surface, causing the air above the torn bank to shimmer faintly on thermal cameras. Stand near the edge, and you will feel it, a pocket of winter in the midst of warmth. A pocket of winter in the midst of warmth. But the true phenomenon of split bank crossing is auditory. Visitors who wait until dusk report hearing voices. They are faint, distorted by the murmur of the current, yet unmistakable in their cadence. They are voices calling upward from the water, not from the bank, but from the river itself. They do not form sentences, only a single, repeated word. Sometimes a single voice, sometimes several overlapping, always fading back into the white noise of the flowing water after a few seconds. Local archives and regional geological surveys provide a starting point for the mystery. Over a century ago, this was the site of a community ferry, a cable-drawn raft that connected two farming communities. It was a vital, if humble, lifeline. The tragedy occurred during the spring thaw of 1898, a season of catastrophic flooding. The river, swollen and furious with meltwater, surged far beyond its banks. The ferry cable, strained beyond its limit, snapped. The raft, carrying a small group of families returning from a market day, was swept instantly into the raging current. Witnesses from higher ground could only watch as the craft was pulled toward the opposite bank. Which was not a bank at all, but a sheer, undercut wall of earth. In the tremendous force of the flood, that section of the riverbank collapsed entirely, burying the ferry and all upon it. In a sudden, catastrophic landslide of mud and rock. The river eventually receded, carving a new course, but the bank never reformed properly. And soon after, the stories of the cold spot and the echoing pleas began. Modern investigations have focused on the geology and the acoustics. The cold air defies simple explanation. The water temperature is consistent with the rest of the river. Yet a column of air above the scar can be 10 degrees cooler. Geologists suggest a possible spring or fissure releasing groundwater from deep underground. But no such source has been located. The voices are even more perplexing. Audio recordings capture the word. But spectral analysis shows a strange uniformity to the sound. A lack of the natural variation you would expect from multiple human voices. It is as if the river itself has learned a word and repeats it, using the flow over a particular configuration of submerged debris as its vocal cords. Paranormal researchers have attempted communication, without success. The word comes unbidden, triggered by no apparent stimulus. It seems to be tied to the fading of the light, as if the approaching darkness allows the sound to surface. Those who have heard it describe a feeling of profound helplessness, a mirror to the plea itself. It is not a frightening sound, but a deeply sad one, a sound that evokes the exact moment hope was extinguished. Today, Split Bank Crossing is a quiet, somber place. The field leading to it is fallow, and no path is maintained. People come, not for recreation, but for reflection. They stand at a respectful distance, feeling the unnatural chill wrap around their ankles. And they listen to the river. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the shadows grow long, the water offers up its lonely, looping echo. A single word, polished smooth by the endless current, rising from the dark, cold place. Where the bank split and a world disappeared. It is a sound that turns the river from a body of water into a living archive. Forever murmuring the final, unanswered moment of a community's loss. At the southern edge of the old canal district, where the water widens into a basin before meeting the river, there is a place known as Last Fair Landing. It is a simple wooden dock, its planks silvered by time, serving no purpose now but to offer a view of the quiet water. The large brick warehouse behind it is empty, its windows dark. This is a forgotten corner, a place of stillness. That is, until someone finds a coin. They are never hidden. A coin will simply be there, lying in plain sight on the gray wood of the dock. It might be caught in a crack between two planks or resting near a rusted cleat. Sometimes a worn Georgian silver sixpence. They are coins that have not been in circulation for a century or more. And they share two impossible, consistent properties. First, they are always wet. Not damp from morning dew or a recent rain, but beaded with moisture, as if they have just been lifted from the canal's depths. The water is cool and fresh, not brackish. The second property is the one that causes the finder to pause, to turn the coin over in their palm with a slow, dawning unease. Despite being wet, the metal is warm to the touch. Not the mild warmth of a pocket, but a deep, pervasive heat, like a stone that has been sitting in the sun all day. It is the warmth of a living hand. This combination, the chill of canal water and the heat of recent possession, creates a profound cognitive dissonance. The history of the landing provides a somber context. In the bustling industrial age, this was a private wharf for the large warehouse, which was, for a time, a textile mill. But it also served a darker, unofficial purpose. Before modern ambulance services, this was where the city's watermen would bring certain cases. If a person was found in the canals, the constabulary would call for a waterman to retrieve the body. These gruff, taciturn men would row the recovered individual here, to this discreet dock, to await the coroner's cart. It was a place of last arrival, a final landing. The watermen were always paid for this duty, a small, grim fee. There are no records of hauntings here, no shadowy figures or strange sounds. The phenomenon is entirely tactile, focused on these small, metallic artifacts. Parapsychologists who have studied the site suggest it is a form of object-focused resonance. The intense, repeated emotional charge of those transactions of the grim handing over of payment for the retrieval of a life vendetta imbued the very concept of the coin at this location. The coins are not literal lost change. They are psychic impressions, manifestations of that specific moment of exchange. They appear wet from the canal they were earned from, and warm from the hand that last held them in life. Those who discover a coin describe a sudden, heavy silence descending upon the landing. The usual sounds of distant traffic or birds seem to fade away. There is a feeling of being observed, not with malice, but with a solemn, bureaucratic expectation. It is as if the landing itself is awaiting a transaction to be completed. What one does with the coin appears to be important. The stories from those who have taken them are consistent. The warmth fades within an hour, leaving behind only a cold, old, wet piece of metal. Often, misfortune of a minor, nagging variety seems to follow a persistent headaches, a run of bad luck, a feeling of being followed by a vague melancholy. Those who return to the landing and place the coin back on the dock, however, report an immediate sense of relief. The silence lifts. The strange focus dissipates. And the coin, when left, is always gone by the next dawn, as if the transaction has finally been reconciled. Last Fair Landing teaches a quiet, unsettling lesson about economy and emotion. It is a place where the boundary between a simple fee and the profound weight of mortality became blurred. The phenomenon suggests that some exchanges are so charged with gravity that their tokens can never truly be spent. They must cycle back to the point of origin, reappearing again and again, wet with the waters of finality and warm with the fleeting heat of the living world. To find a coin there is to momentarily hold a paradox. You are touching an object that exists in two states at once, both just retrieved from the deep and just released from a living hand. It is a stark, physical reminder that every ending has a practical cost, a last fare to be paid. And sometimes, in forgotten places, that payment quietly returns, waiting on the weathered wood for someone to acknowledge the debt. And to gently, respectfully, let it go. On a wide, slow bend of the Grey River, there is a crossing known as low-water Ferry Point. For generations, a flat-bottomed cable ferry shuttled wagons, livestock, and people from bank to bank. That service ended half a century ago, the ferry itself sold for scrap. All that remains are two stone ramps leading down into the water, and the thick, rusted iron rings set into the rock where the ferry cables were once secured. The point is quiet now, a place for fishermen and history buffs. But it holds a secret, one that is only revealed during times of drought, when the river runs low. In a typical season, the Grey River is deep and murky, its waters the color of steeped tea, hiding the bottom completely. But in late summer, or during prolonged dry spells, the level can drop dramatically. The current slows, the water clears slightly, and the riverbed is exposed as a landscape of smooth stones, ancient tree roots, and patches of bright sand. And it is then, in that translucent, shallow water just off the old stone ramp, that the shapes become visible. They are not wrecks, nor are they natural rock formations. They are long, dark, elliptical outlines resting on the bottom. Each roughly the size and shape of a small cart or a large animal. There appear to be 3 or 4 of them, arranged in a loose line as if waiting in a queue. They are the color of wet slate, slightly darker than the surrounding riverbed, with edges that seem blurred, as if coated in a thin layer of the finest silt. By themselves, these shapes would be a curious geological oddity. But they are not inert. Observers who have spent time watching from the bank report a faint, almost imperceptible movement. It is not a shift in position. It is a slow, gentle pulsing, a slight expansion and contraction of the dark forms. The rhythm is lethargic, like the deep, slow breathing of a creature in a profound sleep. A patch of sunlight dappling the shape will subtly change its pattern. A stream of tiny bubbles, too regular to be random, will sometimes rise from one end of an ellipse and drift toward the surface. Local archives contain no mention of these shapes. The official history of the ferry is one of simple, mundane operation. Yet there are older stories, passed down in fragments. About the Ferrymina code. They spoke of never crossing at the lowest moon. Of making an offering of tobacco twist tossed into the current on the first run of the month. And of a profound respect for the riverbed itself. The ferry, they said, did not just carry things across the water. It carried them over what slept beneath. The most compelling theory comes from a retired geologist who studied the area. He suggests the shapes could be vast, waterlogged peat beds, or unusual clay deposits that trap and release gases with changes in temperature and pressure, creating the illusion of respiration. But he concedes that the specific placement, directly in the ferry's path, and their consistent number, defies easy explanation. Those who have waded out to examine the shapes during these low water periods describe a palpable change in the atmosphere. The usual sounds of the river seem muted. There is a feeling of trespass, of standing too close to something that is only temporarily exposed. Several have reported a deep, subaudible vibration felt through the soles of their feet. A hum that matches the slow pulse they see. No one has ever tried to touch one of the dark forms. An instinctive, primal warning seems to hold them back. The phenomenon appears to be tied to the ferry's old route. The shapes lie in the direct line the vessel would take, as if the ferry passed over them twice daily for 100 years. Some paranormal researchers propose a symbiotic relationship. The regular, gentle passage of the flat-bottomed boat over the riverbed may have acted as a kind of lullaby, a rhythmic reassurance that kept whatever lies below settled. Now, with the ferry gone, the sleep has grown fitful. The shapes become visible and restless. Not just because the water is low, but because they are waiting for a familiar vibration that never comes. Today, Low Water Ferry Point is a place of quiet observation. When the river is high, it is simply a scenic relic. But when the waters recede, a pilgrimage of sorts begins. People come to stand on the old stone ramp and look down into the clarified depths. They watch the slow, somnolent movement of the dark ellipses. They feel the strange, watchful silence that hangs over the crossing. It is a sight that inspires awe, not fear. A reminder that a river is not just water. It is also the bed it flows over, and perhaps, what has become part of that bed. The shapes do not threaten. They simply exist, breathing in time with the Rivera's own slow heart. Dreaming their deep, wet dreams beneath the current. Waiting, perhaps forever, for a ferry that will never again glide over them. Lulling them back into darker, deeper sleep. On the eastern shore of Lake Grendel, where the water is shallow and choked with reeds, there is a single, solitary post. It stands, or rather, leans, in the perpetual twilight of the marsh. This place has a name, whispered by those who navigate these waters. They call it Cracked Post Landing. The post itself is a relic of a forgotten purpose. Perhaps it once held a sign, or marked a boundary, or secured a small boat. Now, it is just a weathered spar of gray wood, splintered at the top, tilting at a 45-degree angle toward the dark water. Looks as if a great sigh from the deep mud finally bent it, a slow surrender over decades. The water around it is unnaturally still. Even on windy days, when whitecaps dance on the open lake. The circle of water surrounding Cracked Post remains a placid, black mirror. Dragonflies seem to avoid it. Birds never perch on its slanted peak. The air here is thick and silent, heavy with the smell of wet earth and decaying vegetation. But the silence is not absolute. If you are patient, and if you are still, you will begin to hear the other sound. If you are patient, and if you are still, you will begin to hear the other sound. It starts softly, a faint, rhythmic scraping. It comes from below, from the waterline where the post disappears into the inky depths. It is the sound of something abrasive dragging along soaked wood. A slow, persistent scratching, like a nail tracing the same groove over and over. A slow, persistent scratching, like a nail tracing the same groove over and over. Visitors to the landing often mistake it at first. They think it is a branch rubbing in the current, or a piece of debris caught in the sediment. But there is no current here. And the sound has a disturbing intentionality to it. It is not random. It is a process. Then comes the movement. The post, though old and rotten, is thick and firmly embedded. Yet, on occasion, it shudders. It is a gentle, trembling shake, as if a great weight has brushed against it far below the surface. The water around its base does not ripple outward from a splash. Instead, it shivers, vibrating in perfect sync with the wood. It is the unmistakable sensation of a tug, a testing pull from something anchored in the deep mud. The local history offers no clear answers. Some of the older fishing guides speak of a tale about a logging operation a century ago. They say a massive, ancient tree was lost during transport, sinking vertically into the soft bottom of the marsh, its roots clutching the lakebed with a dying grip. The post, they suggest, was driven in later, right beside it, and over time the sinking tree has been slowly pulling its neighbor down, root by root, into a shared grave. Others tell a different story. They speak of a strange geological feature, a soft pocket of quicksand-like silt that breathes and shifts with the water table. The scratching, they say, is simply the sound of the wood straining against the moving earth, a natural, if eerie, phenomenon. But those who have spent the longest watching Cracked Post know these explanations feel incomplete. The scratching is too rhythmic. The shuddering of the post is too deliberate. There is a patience to it, a relentless, slow-motion effort that suggests not geology, but agency. Scientists who have taken samples describe the sediment as extraordinarily deep and unstable, filled with layers of preserved organic matter. They found no evidence of a sunken tree. But they did note strange, concentric patterns in the mud cores, as if something large had burrowed in spirals. Their instruments detected faint, low-frequency vibrations emanating from the lakebed. But their source remained unidentifiable, obscured by the thick layer of soft, sound-absorbing muck. To stand at the water's edge is to feel a peculiar tension. You are witnessing an event that operates on a timescale foreign to human life. This is not a sudden haunting. It is a slow, geological haunting. Each scratch is a minute taken off a sentence that lasts millennia. This is not a sudden haunting. It is a slow, geological haunting. Each gentle shake is a year passing in the life of whatever waits below. The post leans further each season, by a fraction of an inch. The angle is measured by photographers who return year after year, their comparison shots proving the slow, inevitable descent. It is a clock, and its ticking is the sound of splinters giving way. What is pulling? Is it the mud itself, a hungry, liquid earth? Is it the remains of that fabled tree, seeking companionship in the dark? Or is it something else, something that found the post an interesting intrusion, a new thing to investigate, to test, and eventually, to claim? We may never know. Cracked Post Landing is a lesson in patience and perspective. Our world is fast and loud. The drama here is slow and quiet, a tug-of-war between wood and water, played out over a century. The post will one day disappear beneath the surface, pulled into the black. The scratching will finally cease. But until that day, it stands, or leans, as a monument to an unseen force. It reminds us that the ground beneath our feet is not always solid. That deep water holds secrets that work in silence. And that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed with a respectful and wary awe. The post leans, the water shivers. And from the darkness below, the slow work continues. Along the quiet expanse of the River Ain, there is a place known locally as the Midnight Crossing. By day, it is an unremarkable stretch of water, wide and slow-moving, flanked by meadows and ancient willows. Barges pass without incident, and anglers cast their lines into its placid depths. It holds no visible markers of distinction, no ruins, no unusual geography. Its secret is reserved for the night, and governed by a precise and unyielding clock. The phenomenon begins without warning, but never without punctuality. In the minutes leading to midnight, a subtle change permeates the air. The normal sounds of the night, the rustle of creatures in the reed beds, the distant call of an owl, seem to hush in anticipation. The water, which moments before reflected the moonlight in a serene, silver sheet, grows unnaturally calm, becoming as smooth and dark as polished slate. Then, as the last second of the day slips away, the crossing erupts. The water does not merely ripple, it churns violently. As if a colossal engine has been engaged deep below the surface. A great, swirling boil erupts in the center of the river, sending out concentric waves that slam against the banks with surprising force. The sound is a low, grinding roar mixed with a furious splash. A chaotic symphony that fills the night air. Logs and debris, carried peacefully downstream just moments before, are pulled into the tumult, tossed and spun in the whitewater. It is a display of raw, untamed hydraulic power, lasting for exactly 1 minute. When the minute passes, the violence ceases with a suddenness that is jarring. The boiling center collapses in on itself. The turbulent waves subside as if being sucked back into the riverbed. Within a handful of seconds, the water is once again perfectly smooth and silent. But the silence left behind is different. It is a deep, profound, and heavy quiet. A vacuum that seems to absorb even the Listenera's own heartbeat. It is the silence of shock, of aftermath. The history of this stretch of river is tied to a forgotten piece of engineering. In the late 1800s, this was the proposed site for a grand, swing-bridge ferry, a mechanical marvel designed to carry rail cars across the water. A massive stone caisson, a hollow watertight structure, was sunk into the riverbed to serve as the central pivot foundation. Work proceeded for months, but on the eve of the caissona's final sealing, a calculation error proved disastrous. A shift in the water pressure, combined with an underestimation of the Rivera's underground springs, caused a catastrophic blowout. At precisely midnight, during a shift change, the caisson ruptured. The river rushed into the workspace in a torrent, trapping and claiming several workers inside the structure before it fully flooded and settled. The project was abandoned, the machinery left to rust on the riverbed. And the story faded into local lore. The phenomenon, however, did not fade. Fishermen working late, and later, couples walking the moonlit paths, were the first to note the timed event. Engineers were baffled. There are no tidal influences here, no dams upstream, no logical explanation for a daily, timed surge of such localized violence. Divers who have examined the site report a strange, crater-like formation on the riverbed, partially filled with silt, and the spectral shapes of rusted iron protruding from the mud. Scientific monitoring has only deepened the mystery. Submerged sensors detect a sudden, powerful upwelling of water from several deep fissures in the riverbed. At the stroke of midnight, the water temperature in the churn drops significantly, suggesting it is being drawn from a cold, subterranean layer. The event is so regular that it has been used to calibrate clocks. Yet, as quickly as it begins, the flow stops, and the river returns to its usual state, leaving no physical evidence on the surface except for the lingering, eerie silence. Today, the meadows around the midnight crossing are popular by day, but empty by night. Those who live nearby simply close their windows as midnight approaches. A small ritual acknowledging the Rivera's private routine. Occasionally, a curious soul will wait on the bank to witness it. They watch the water transform from a mirror into a maelstrom, and then back again into something even more unsettling, absolute stillness. The experience is less about seeing the chaos, and more about enduring the silence that follows. It is a silence that feels earned, and heavy with memory. A daily reenactment of a moment of structural failure and sudden, watery engulfment. A powerful release followed by the deep, permanent quiet of the drowned. The river remembers its rupture, and every night at midnight, for one exact minute, it breathes it out again. Down a disused towpath, where the river widens into a slow, brown expanse, there is a crumbling brick landing. And beside it, leaning as if tired, stands a small, wooden shack. Its windows are boarded, its roof sags under the weight of old moss. This is the Rivera's edge quarters. It has no official name on any map, but that is what the few who know of it call the place. Its windows are boarded, its roof sags under the weight of old moss. It looks utterly abandoned, a candidate for collapse with the next strong storm. But it is not empty. The shack exerts a peculiar presence. It is not a feeling of being watched from within, but rather a sense of occupied solitude. Visitors who brave the overgrown path often report the same sequence of experiences. First, there is the profound silence of the riverbank, broken only by the lap of water. Then, from inside the shack, comes the sound of movement. It is the clear, unmistakable sound of footsteps on the bare wooden floorboards. They are not frantic or hurried. They are the slow, measured steps of a person moving in a confined space. A few paces from what might be the far wall to the door. Then the steps retreat. Sometimes the steps are heavy, like those of a man in work boots. On other occasions, they are lighter, more hesitant. The pacing suggests routine, a quiet occupation within those four walls. Driven by curiosity, or perhaps concern that someone is trapped inside, people always try the door. It is a simple plank door, worn and gray, with an old iron latch. It is always, without exception, locked. Not just stuck or jammed. It is firmly, definitively fastened from the inside. The latch will not budge. Peering through the gaps in the boarded window reveals nothing but deep shadow. The footsteps continue during these attempts, seemingly oblivious to the presence outside. Some have tried to force the door, but a strange reluctance always stops them. It feels less like breaking into an abandoned shed, and more like violating a private residence. The history of this landing provides some clues. In the late 1800s, this was a busy transshipment point. The shack was built as the quarters for the lockkeeper or landing agent, a man tasked with logging cargo and managing the moorings. Records are sparse, but they indicate the last official occupant was a man named Elias Hodge. He was a veteran of the river, a solitary figure known for his meticulous, almost ritualistic habits. He lived in that shack year-round. Neighboring bargemen would recall seeing his lamp burning at all hours, and hearing him pacing inside during the long nights when the river was too foggy for travel. Elias Hodge disappeared in the winter of 1901. The story goes that a late-season barge, rushing to beat the freeze, arrived after dark. The barge captain found the landing deserted, the shack dark. But the door was locked from the inside. Assuming Hodge had stepped out, the captain forced the door. The small room was empty. A pot sat cold on the stove. A logbook was open on the desk. There was no sign of struggle or departure. The only thing missing was Elias Hodge himself. Some speculated he fell into the river. But the locked door presented an impossible puzzle. This historical mystery appears to have bled into the present. Paranormal researchers suggest that Elias Hodge did not vanish, but that his profound and habitual connection to the space created a persistent imprint. His daily routine, his solitary pacing, his vigilant occupation of the quarters, became the defining characteristic of the location. The phenomenon is not a ghost, but a recording of his existence, a loop of his most common activity. The locked door is not a barrier, but a key part of the memory. It is a detail that reinforces the mystery, ensuring the sanctity of the private space within the echo. To stand outside the Rivera's Edge quarters is to feel like an uninvited guest. The footsteps inside do not respond to calls. They simply continue their patient, endless patrol. The work of watching the river, of maintaining a solitary vigil, continues on some level that we cannot see or interrupt. The lesson here is one of ingrained habit and the persistence of purpose. Some lives are so defined by routine and place that the essence of that routine outlasts the individual. The shack is not haunted by a tragedy, but by a profession, by a way of being. Elias Hodge's duty was to be there, and in a way, he still is. The footsteps are the sound of that duty being performed, forever. The locked door is the final, perfect boundary of that private, enduring world. A mystery that politely, firmly, asks you to stay on the outside. Listening to the soft, eternal steps of a man who never quite clocked out. The fog does not lift from the river at Greywater. It is a permanent resident, a thick, woolen blanket that muffles sound and swallows light. The town itself is quiet, a place of lowered voices and drawn curtains. Everyone here knows the rule. You do not listen to the far shore. For as long as anyone can remember, the voices have come across the water. They are not loud, not shouts or cries. They are conversational, intimate. A fragment of a forgotten song your mother used to hum. The calm, steady tone of a loved one you thought was lost. The voices are always familiar, and they are always calling you by name. The old records in the town hall speak of it as a geographic anomaly, a trick of the acoustics across the narrow, deep river. They have built their entire lives around the principle of non-answer. Children are taught from the crib to ignore the siren murmur from across the water. To never, under any circumstances, reply. Maya arrived in Greywater 2 months ago, a geologist studying the unique silt deposits. The town's superstitions were, to her, a fascinating cultural footnote. The first time she heard it, she was sketching rock formations. The voice was clear, a warm baritone cutting through the damp air. It was her brother's voice, calling her name with the same gentle insistence he used when he had a secret to share. She knew it was impossible. Her brother was halfway across the world. She shook her head, a smile touching her lips, and attributed it to fatigue and suggestion. But the voices persisted. A beloved professor offering encouragement. A dear friend from university asking for help. Each voice was a piece of her past, perfectly recreated. The scientific part of her mind raced. Could it be some form of auditory pareidolia, the mind finding pattern in the white noise of the river? Yet the clarity was unnerving. One evening, the tension in the air was thicker than the fog. A storm was brewing upstream. The river, usually so placid, churned with a hidden energy. Maya sat on her porch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. Then the voice came. It was her father's. Not as he was in his final years, but in his prime, strong and reassuring. He said he was there, on the other side. He said he was lost and needed her to guide him back. The pull was visceral, a hook set deep in her heart. All her training, all the town's warnings, melted away. This was her father. He needed her. Leaning over the porch rail towards the soupy darkness. She did the unthinkable. She answered. She called back, saying she was here, that she could hear him. The moment the words left her lips, the world tipped. A profound dizziness seized her, not a spinning of the room, but a deep, internal vertigo, as if her very soul had lost its balance. The sound of the river, the wind in the trees, her own heartbeat, all receded into a hollow ringing silence. And then came the cold. Not the chill of the evening air, but a specific, localized cold on her back. It was the unmistakable, bone-deep sensation of two large, wet hands pressing firmly between her shoulder blades. There was no push, not physically. But the intent was clear, a silent, grim pressure forward, towards the railing, towards the water below. She gripped the wooden rail, knuckles white, anchoring herself against the silent force. The cold seeped through her coat, through her skin, a numbness spreading outwards from those phantom palms. Across the water, her father's voice changed. The warmth bled out of it, replaced by a hollow, hungry mimicry, repeating her name in a toneless loop. The other voices joined in, a chorus of familiar sounds now stripped of all humanity, becoming a cacophony of pulls and demands. With a gasp that tore at her throat, Maya threw herself backward, collapsing onto the rough planks of the porch. The cold hands vanished. The dizziness subsided, leaving a nauseating throb in its place. The voices faded back to their usual, distant murmurs, once again pretending to be fragments of memory. She lay there for a long time, shaking, the warmth of the spilt tea seeping into her clothes. She finally understood. The voices were not ghosts, not memories given sound. They were something else entirely, something that lurked in the geography of this place, studying the living from the unseen far shore. They collected fragments of sound and emotion, learning what to mimic to lure a response. The answer was the permission it needed. The dizziness was a severing, a momentary disconnect of the spirit from the body. And the cold hands were the final step. Maya left Greywater the next morning. She filed no official report, wrote no paper on the anomalous acoustics. Some truths are not meant for data sets. Sometimes, she still wakes in the deep of night, her back prickling with a phantom chill. She thinks of the fog, and the quiet, careful people who live within it. And she knows the most important lesson is not about what calls from the far shore, but about the profound, essential strength it takes to never, ever answer. On the western bank of the wide, slow-moving river Silene, there is a stone landing that serves no apparent purpose. The modern town lies a mile upstream, with its bright lights and steel bridge. But here, the old cobblestones dip into the dark water, worn smooth by countless footsteps that ceased long ago. This is the place they call the last landing, but its older, more chilling name is the ferry that never came back. By day, it is a peaceful, if melancholy, spot. The stonework is slick with emerald moss. And the only sound is the gentle lap of river water. It feels abandoned, a relic of a bygone era when the ferry was the only connection between the two sides of the valley. But as dusk settles and the mist begins to rise from the cool surface of the Silene, the atmosphere shifts. The landing seems to become expectant. A deep, instinctual quiet descends, as if the world is holding its breath. Locals avoid the road that leads to the landing after sunset. They speak of hearing the sounds. It starts with the faint, metallic clink of a chain, like a mooring line being adjusted. Then, the clear, rhythmic creak of oarlocks. Not the modern putter of an engine, but the ancient, wooden groan of oars being methodically dipped and pulled. The sound echoes across the water, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It grows closer, as if a vessel is approaching the stone steps from the heart of the river mist. Witnesses describe a feeling of profound loneliness that accompanies the sounds. A cold draft will often sweep up from the water, carrying the scent of damp stone and river clay. Some report seeing the water near the landing ripple against the current, as if displaced by an unseen bow. Yet, no ferry ever appears. The sounds reach their peak, the oarlocks groaning just feet from the shore, and then they simply stop. The echoes fade. The mist remains, undisturbed by any shape. The landing is empty, as it has always been. The historical record provides a tragic anchor for the legend. Over a century ago, a large ferry named the River Maiden did operate from this spot. One autumn evening, overloaded with passengers and cargo, it cast off into a gathering fog. It never reached the opposite shore. No wreckage was ever found, and no bodies were recovered. The river had swallowed the ferry whole, leaving behind only a community shattered by loss. The official explanation was a sudden squall or a hidden snag. But the stories that grew in the absence of facts are more persistent. Some say the ferryman, an old man named Elias, was heartsick that night, his mind on a lost love, and he simply rode into the mist and never turned around. Others whisper of a deeper mystery, that the river itself claimed the ferry for a purpose, binding it to a cycle of endless, futile travel. Investigations with sensitive audio equipment have captured anomalies. Recordings made at the landing on still nights sometimes contain the faint, rhythmic thump and creak consistent with rowing. Sounds with no clear source in the environment. Sonar sweeps of the riverbed reveal nothing unusual, just the smooth, deep silt that has covered secrets for 100 years. To stand on those cold stones after dark is to stand at the edge of a memory. So powerful it has imprinted itself on the location. The phenomenon is not one of ghosts in the traditional sense, but of an event that refuses to conclude. The departure was so abrupt, the absence so complete, that some echo of it continues to play out, night after night. The passengers, it is said, are not lost souls in white sheets. The sound of the oars is the sound of a journey perpetually beginning, but never progressing. The ferry is forever crossing, forever caught in the moment between departure and arrival, in the thick of the mist that took it. It is a story about endings, or rather, the lack of them. The human need for closure, and the unsettling truth that some things in this world are simply left unresolved. The river flows on, indifferent. The stones remain. And the landing, every night, waits for a ferry that is forever approaching, carrying passengers that will never disembark, in a journey that transcends time. The ferry that never came back is a monument to a question mark. It does not offer terror, but a profound, quiet sorrow. It reminds us that some paths are only meant to be traveled once, and that sometimes, the most haunting thing of all is not a presence, but an everlasting absence, announced by the slow, sad creak of oars in the dark. Thank you, my dear friend, for standing beside these haunted river ferry landings with me tonight. These rivers once carried people toward new lives. But they also carried fear, loss, and final moments. The ferry landings remain as quiet witnesses. Waiting. Listening. Remembering every soul that never reached the other side. If you ever walk along a river in Indiana after dark, remember these stories. Do not answer voices from the water. Do not follow drifting lights. And never wait too long at a place meant for crossing. Some ferries never arrive. And some crossings were never meant to be completed. Rest well tonight. Keep the lights close. And until our next journey into the shadows, listen carefully. Because the river is always listening too.